Okay, so what we're doing in this lesson is we're learning the quadratic formula. So we've learned a lot of different ways to solve quadratic equations, and this is the last one. And so when you're using the quadratic formula, everything needs to be in this form, which is the standard form, where it's x squared, then an x, then a number, and that has to equal 0. If it's not in that order, then you have to move things so they're in the right order. Okay. All right, so this is the quadratic formula. There's a little song to it, and you kind of repeat it. It's going to sound funny because I'm going to have to repeat it myself, but usually one person sings it and the other person repeats it. So opposite of B, plus or minus square root, B squared minus 4AC, B squared minus 4AC, all over 2A, all over 2A. So it's a silly song, but it helps people remember, and especially if you haven't had to do quadratic formula before. So the piece that is the discriminant is this part. This part underneath is the discriminant. And when you do a problem, the discriminant always will tell you the type of answer you have. So remember from before when we were solving, two solutions are when you graph it and the parabola touches the x-axis in two places. So there's two real solutions. One real solution is when the parabola touches and crosses the x-axis in one spot. And then a no solution is when the quadratic does not pass. It does not pass the x-axis, so there's no real answers. There's two imaginary. So we're going to say two imaginary. So we've started working with imaginary, and remember the way you get imaginary is -1. Okay? All right, so when I look at my discriminant, there's things that can happen. My discriminant can be a 0, it can be a positive, or it can be a negative. When my discriminant is a positive, that means I'm taking the square root of a positive number, which will give me two answers. So whenever I do the discriminant and it's a positive number, then I know that I'll have two real solutions. If I do my discriminant and I get a 0, the square root of 0 is just 0. So something plus 0 and something minus 0 is the same thing. So if I get it equal to 0, I know that I'm going to only have one real solution. The last answer is, the only way you can get an I is if you take the square root of a negative. So if I get the absolute value less than 0, which means it's just a negative, that tells me I have two imaginary solutions. Because imaginary numbers, remember, are plus or minus, and so I'll always have two answers. All right, so let's do a couple examples. So when we look at this problem on the left, the first issue is that this 5 isn't in the right spot. I need to move it over, and I'm going to move it over by that. I'm going to, which is my coefficient in front, which is just a 1, my B, which is my middle coefficient, -4, and my C, which is -5. Remember, it's important to have an x squared then x, because that way you know what is what. So too many times people put it in the wrong order, and then they get confused by what's what. Okay, so I'm going to plug it in. The opposite of B, so that's my 4, plus or minus square root, B squared minus 4AC, all over 2A. One thing that I want you to be careful of is I want to make sure that this goes in parentheses. If you're not using a calculator, that's awesome, but if you are, you need to make sure that you plug it in parentheses. So it should be -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times -5. And so I did 36. So I get 4 plus or minus the square root of 36 over 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. Well, this is a positive number, so I know I'm going to get 2 real, but I can take the square root of 36. So this becomes 4 plus 6 over 2 and 4 minus 6 over 2. Well, 4 plus 6 is 10, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So there's my first answer. 4 minus 6 is -2, and -2 divided by 2 is -1. So there's my two answers for that first quadratic formula. Okay, so now looking at the next problem, it's set up, so that's good. I know my A is 8, my B is -8, and my C is 2. If you wanted to factor out a 2, you could to make it smaller, but in the end, it's not going to make a difference. So, opposite of B, so it's 8 plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC, and then all over 2A. So again, I'm going to plug in this first part to find out what I get for the discriminant. So -8 squared, make sure you put parentheses around that, minus 4 times 8 times 2. And so I get 0. And then 2 times 8 is 16. Well, the square root of 0 is just 0. So what I get is I get 8 over 16, which is 1/2. The reason there's not 2 answers is because 8 plus 0 is the same thing as 8 minus 0. Okay, so now we just got to do a couple examples. We'll do one more here where there's like terms on opposite sides of the equal sign. So go ahead and write that down. Okay, so I minus 3 on both sides. I get -6x squared plus 3x minus 1 is 0. Now that I have my 0 there, I can identify my A, which is -6, my B, which is 3, and my C, which is -1. She can't see that. And so now plug it in my formula. Opposite of B, plus or minus square root, B squared minus 4AC, all over 2A. So again, I'm going to plug in this part, which is just the discriminant. So it's going to be 3 squared minus 4 times -6 times -1, and so I get -55. 2 times 6 is -12. Well, 55 is just 5 times 11, so I can't break that down. But what I can do is I can take out this negative. And remember, the square root of a negative is I. So I get -3 plus or minus I square root of 5 over -12. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is we're just going to practice finding the discriminant, which is not that bad because it's just the B squared minus 4AC. Well, A for this one's 1 because there's a 1 in front. B is 4 and C is 3. So it's going to be 4 squared minus 4 times A times C, which is just 16 minus 12, which is 4. So since I have a positive number, I look at my table over here, and positive numbers have 2 real solutions. So I know that since I have a positive 4, it's 2 real solutions. Okay, last one, and we're done with notes. So for this one, the 4 is in the wrong spot, so I got to bring it over. So it's -x squared minus x minus 4. So for this one, A is -1, B is -1, and C is -1. So we got a ton of negatives. So it's the opposite of B, plus or minus square root, B squared minus 4AC, all over 2A. And so again, oops, I went too far. I'm zoning out. You're not supposed to do all that. So all you have to do here is plug this in B squared minus 4AC. So that's 1 minus 1, 2, 3 negatives. So that's 3 negatives minus 4. So it's -3. So I go back and I look here, and when it's negative, that means it's 2 imaginary. So when you're solving these problems, I think the most important thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to make sure that you get it in order. And when you get it in order, you're going to need to identify the A, the B, and the C.